Thank you, Sam. My name is John Patterson from Atkins, Group Engineer in the asset management business. Been working on national guidance and best practice toolkits for a number of years, and as part of that was a member of the team that was responsible for the review of the code of practice. As well as implementing the code itself, been looking at we're doing a lot of engagement recently with a number of workshops. There's been a couple of workshops obviously sponsored by the DfT that some of you may have attended in Manchester, and there's also an event in London. I know there's been some others going on with individual sort of branches or groups as well. So there's been a lot of good engagement, and I suppose the first thing to say from that is, you know, that sort of feel where we are with this has been very positive. I think there's still some, you know, some challenges out there and areas that people want to improve in, but it's really being seen as an opportunity rather than a set of issues. I suppose I'd just like to kick off with an apologies from Steve Berry of the DfT. He's going to provide some view and comments from the department, and also really from the UK Roads Liaison Group. The code of practice is a UK Roads Liaison Group document, and certainly it's Steve's view. It will be obviously a bit of a loss that he's unable to make it. He really is. He is sorry about that, but he was keen for this session to keep to go ahead and keep the momentum with some of the recent engagement. And just a quick thank you to those in the room, Sam, for the coordination of the event and handling any of the questions that will be coming through. And also we've got Larry Griffiths in the room, who any of you who attended the workshops will be familiar with, who's most ably arranged most of the events for this particular piece of engagement. So thank you again. So what are we looking to cover today? Well, I suppose that first point there, a recap of the code. I'm conscious that with this being an open webinar, we could have a very broad audience, and so we're not going to spend too much time dwelling on the past and some of the stuff that I'm sure many of you will have seen a number of times, but just thought it was important just to cover a couple of the key points there, just to make sure that everyone was up to speed with this, certainly in case there's you know, stakeholders who are perhaps on the periphery of the implementing the code who are on board. If this is something that's relatively new to them, just sort of touching on that and perhaps providing direction of where they can find more. We're also going to be going through the key element of this is going through, I suppose, the findings from the workshops. How we're going to do that, I know that some of the content that you may see, if you have been in attendance on the workshops in Manchester and London, some of that might be familiar. If so, hopefully we'll be able to provide a little bit of, should we say, personal perspective, certainly from the feedback we've had on the day, from some of the other engagement, and hopefully that'll be able to provide a little bit more context and value for you. For those who weren't able to join us on those events, hopefully this will really be able to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour through what we were covering, some of those discussions, etc. Conscious that the workshops themselves were half-day events. We are going to try and keep this quite concise. We have got an hour slot. We may or may not take up that full amount of time, but we'll certainly try to keep it as swift and punchy as possible. So looking at that, there will be touching on some of the key actions. So some of those what probably been seen as, you know, the starting points for adopting the code, and some of those must-haves, but also reflecting a little bit on some of the opportunities, some of which some of you may already be taking on board, but certainly these are probably some of the areas that if you have been looking at starting to get to grips with the code, where to look to next. And we'll also have a Q&A session. I think we've got a slot certainly at the end, depending on what comes through. If we've got visibility of it, I shall we may pick up some if they are timely. Otherwise, I think for the time being, I think if we aim for that towards the back end of the presentation, that'd be great. So please do, please do fire those through on the message facility. If we obviously we will try to address those or provide some feedback on the day right now. If we can't, please by all means we will look to pick those up either with whoever we need to. So please do make use of that facility. So here we go. So kicking off with that recap on the code. So the first thing to point out was that there were the previous codes, well-maintained highways, well-lit highways and management highway structures. This new code is a review of those documents. It wasn't a rewrite. It really was taking existing good practice, streamlining that, and certainly the real emphasis on introducing a risk-based approach to really produce, provide that flexibility and benefit to practitioners. It was, and I think Steve Berry is always keen to point out that that was something that was very much led by practitioners and by the sector. So yeah, that was in response to, should we say, sector need. The document itself, the status, it's a guidance document. It's not a mandatory or legislative requirement, but certainly because of its status as a guidance document and how it is seen within the industry, if you do wish to deviate from the code or take another approach, that is possible. You would need to obviously have some very robust justification for that, and there perhaps are some risks to that, but just to emphasise, it is guidance. The code itself was produced through extensive consultation. It wasn't just a project team in a dark room producing what their view of the world was. It very much took on board I think we had thousands, literally over 1,000 individual comments and the like, plus hundreds of face-to-face through a series of workshops. So that was covering practitioners, professional institutions, risk, legal and insurance practitioners, and also user groups as well, which perhaps broadened out some of this away from not just the asset as an asset, but the asset providing that service. So the code was published 28th of October 2016. There was a 2-year transition period, so I don't think it takes great leaps of mental arithmetic to see that the deadline for that adoption of the code is imminent, within days. I know that there have been a few comments through some of the through the workshops and likewise regarding potential movement on that date. Certainly the view from DfT and UKRLG is that is that date. It's been clearly laid out for that amount of time. There isn't going to be any movement on it. So covering, so the basis of the code is a series of 36 recommendations. Shan't go through those one by one. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with those and could be tested in detail. But those 36 are broadly across 6 themes. That's one way of looking at them, just to sort of provide it, a little bit more accessibility in how you actually digest what could be, quite an onerous list of recommendations to take in one go. Certainly compartmentalising them has proved useful for some of the authorities we've been engaging with. And just to note as well, there's a few asterisks, depending on the size of your screen, you may well be able to see some of the asterisks there. Those recommendations are fed through from the HMEP UKRLG asset management guidance, which sits above this in the document hierarchy. So those recommendations feed through into this and are bolstered by a number of others. So, starting off with from the workshop, I suppose there was a number of, should we say, key themes that we'd certainly, have been brought up and flagged up as work that had already been in progress and work that people were, taking on board as a challenge, etc. And they were broadly, prioritising these. There's a lot of work going on across a lot of authorities, but just trying to sort of prioritise those into, shall we say, the top 5. You see the top 5 on the top 5 themes on the screen there at the moment. So one really regarding coordination and collaboration, defining network hierarchies and that move away from using road classifications, managing risk. 2 words, a lot of definitions, interpretations, and coverage within that category. Asset management processes we'll come on to, and skills and competencies, very much seen as something that underpins, that it's obviously been something on the, that people have been aware of and very much developing in the sector, but that's certainly come to the fore with importance as we move to a risk-based approach. So looking at the first one of coordination and collaboration, I suppose what that first line on there might seem strikingly obvious about engaging with practitioners throughout the authority, across those different asset types. But we have seen that, you know, it's probably happened a little bit more than we would have expected. That in some authorities, there's perhaps been a little bit of a silo view there. I know that highway is being seen as probably the predominant part of you know, implementing the code. Where we've seen you know, great benefits is where there's been that work across those asset types and the various parts of the business, the highways service rather. The second point, again, that's a bit of another internal collaboration point, really being able to engage with those other parts of the you know, the local authority services covering risk, insurance, legal, and how those claims have been defended in the past, and what sort of approach sits well with them, what guidance they can provide, what support. So as well as actual engagement, there can be a bit of you know, mutual assistance there across the departments, and certainly that is key if you are going to be making changes to your policies and your ways of working. As well as internal engagements, certainly external collaboration. You know, where we've seen authorities that have been making progress, and you know, the most progress with the code, it's been very much off the back of not doing it in isolation. They've been working with their neighbours, working with similar types of authorities. They've been sharing some of that learning. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be you know, heavily formal, but having those ongoing conversations, it really does make a difference. So I suppose one of the key messages, if you are out there and you haven't been perhaps engaging with some of the authorities nearby to you, I would very much suggest that you know, there may well be quick wins for you if you do pick up the phone and do share some of that knowledge. So there's a few examples there without going into detail, but you know, there are combined authorities, but there's also sort of more you know, local highway alliances, be they sort of formal or informal. And certainly MSIG have been doing a lot of work from an improvement group perspective, and we can't forget the industry groups. Certainly the UKRLG boards are continuing to do work to support this. And I know certainly the Institute of Lighting Professionals, I understand that there is new guidance on the way from them. I think an update of the TR22 documents, which will very much be supporting the adoption of the code and the principles within it. So there's a lot of other learning that's going on there. So just on that last point regarding guidance and the like, certainly DfT don't view it as being a need for further guidance on the actual risk-based approach and the like. So certainly if you are looking for something like that, then those professional bodies and the like will be a good point of call. So the next area that we've seen a lot of work already underway with was within network hierarchies and developing those. As I mentioned just earlier, a move away from perhaps dividing up that network based on road classification, and certainly moving towards a usage basis. What services is it providing? What you know, what sort, what locations and services is it connecting? How critical are those, etc. So understand there's been a lot of good work with regards to that. I know that some authorities were actually looking at this before the code came out, so it wasn't something new to some authorities, but likewise others have taken that challenge and spent quite some time in doing that, but I think they've certainly seen the benefits in how they can use that to underpin the rest of their risk-based approach. I suppose just some of the comments just to flag up there. It's not a one-off job, this. The network, the usage does change. You know, the surrounding areas change, developments come, others go, etc. So I suppose that there is the need to not just do it once, but have some process in place to actually to look at that and keep that fresh and appropriate, and also have that process in place to actually sort of incorporate and adopt those changes in a robust way. So managing risk, not much on the slide for this one compared to some of the others. And that's probably because there was so much discussion really regarding this one. This is probably the biggest discussion piece, either during the sessions or before or after them. And certainly I know that there's different views on this in different authorities. Now certainly there's been I think it's safe to say there's been a big move away from what might have been previously intervention levels to provide those investigatory levels, to provide some more flexibility regarding how whether the work is required and the like. I know that there's, like I say, there's a number of authorities that have been using that approach. There is also, should we say, school of thought, and that's more than that, more than a school of thought. There is actually a way of working. A number of authorities and groups of authorities in particular have been looking to move towards a dimensionless approach, very much increasing that that sort of the role of the risk assessment at that point of inspection. But like, I think it's just naming names for a couple. I know that again, MSIG have been doing some work with regards to this. I understand Scots. I'm not fully familiar with what they've been up to, but I know that Scots have been doing some good work into that as well. So, like I say, if those of you do have an appetite for perhaps moving that risk-based approach to a higher level, then you may wish to make contact with some of those organisations. I mean, just to point out though that there is no. I think when we are looking at the risk-based approach, there is no right or wrong answer, as long as you've actually put the the thought and the thinking and the planning into it. Every authority is different network, different usage, different risk appetite. So very much depends on your environment and your context as to which of those approaches you really want to take on board and which one is most appropriate for you. So next up is asset management processes. So this is, I suppose, this is possibly sometimes could be seen as stating the obvious. There's a lot of the the work that is going on now isn't too far away from what people have been doing for a long time. There's been a lot of good work already there, and that embedded knowledge, people who really understand their networks have quite possibly been adopting a risk-based approach, either consciously or subconsciously. But one of the I suppose challenges or sort of needs of adopting it like this is certainly to actually have that documented. That is, I think that's critical, certainly for providing that justification for how you've gone about it, and if you are making any sort of defence, if you are in court and the like, and being quizzed over this, having that documentation is absolutely critical to supporting any challenge to that. So no, there are those 3 bullet points in italics, which are really okay. You really want to be able to say what you are going to do, say why you will do it that way, and then evidence that you did what you said you would do. So again, some of that seems like common sense. I think possibly in the past there might have been the burden of workload. If it has been done, okay, well we know it's been done, but certainly with regards to a risk-based approach, having that evidence that of that process from the thinking through to the actual doing is critical. And that last point is a bit of a lesson learned as well regarding when you say what you will do, you need to be saying what you are actually going to do. I think sometimes there's perhaps been some sort of feedback that as practitioners we're always looking to push on and improve, and perhaps sometimes set should we say not necessarily unachievable objectives or plans, but if you do go out and set that bar too high and it isn't achievable, you are going to be shooting yourself in the foot from the very start. So you really do need to be grounded in what you are looking to achieve there. So then this is I suppose the last of the key actions. Skills and competence. I suppose this, nicely links into that previous slide, covering the processes and how we've gone about that. I think one of the sort of key areas of key challenge to the process, and not only being able to document it, but then also if you've got your processes laid out, okay, you've put your thoughts behind why you had made that decision making, you've provide the evidence that how you've done it. I suppose that the next point of challenge, if you have got that, to respond to the courts or any other stakeholder or outside group, it's then okay. Well, how did who came up with that decision? How are they competent? How are they able to measure how are they able to evidence their suitability to make those decisions? And also not just about making the decisions, but also how was that person competent to make that inspection call or undertake that repair. So there's a lot of I guess big emphasis on skills and competencies now. I think one of the things that people we've seen sort of evidence of is developing sort of skills matrices or skills matrix to identify the roles that people are undertaking, what skills they have, what skills they should have, what skills have they got, how do we evidence those. So I know there's been a lot of work already underway with that. I suppose there's a bit of a teaser here from the UKRLG liaison group. There is actually some further work from UKRLG regarding some of these competence frameworks for the various roles in implementing the risk-based approach, and also some specific work regarding whole inspections as well. So that is that's something that's underway, getting underway now, with no doubt some updates in the new year. In the meantime, I know that there's been there's options really regarding formal qualifications. So I know that, for instance, the IHE are doing the asset management framework certificate, and I understand diploma that's got quite a lot of take up. Institute of Asset Management provides perhaps a bit of a broader view of how asset management works and the like, but is equally seeing a turn up in takers. Professional qualifications. So many of those, I guess many of those practitioners won't be unfamiliar with those. Certainly not just chartership and incorporated, but also certainly increasingly the engineering technician qualifications really provides a pathway for those who do want to develop, or certainly a benchmark of where your skills are. So a lot of good work with professional institutions going on with that at the moment. And the inspector qualifications, like I said, there is some work underway with regards to that, but I know at the moment there are a number of schemes and courses out there that people are doing with regards to that. As well as some of those formal ones, I suppose we have also picked up on, because when you get to skills and competencies, as soon as you mention training, there can be a bit of a kickback from, well, not necessarily a kickback, but perhaps a bit of a reality check from some authorities that do have some real pressures with regards to budget and is the budget available for some of that training. We have increasingly seen sort of groups of authorities and regional groups and the like actually either sort of engaging, getting some of that training on board as a group to get some sort of economies of scale, or indeed actually doing some sort of like peer-to-peer or peer-to-peer training, mentorship and the like, and actually that in-house development of skills. So there's options there, but certainly continuing development of staff and being able to evidence that as well, either formally or informally, is going to be critical. So at that point, I think we're getting through there. I'm just looking. I know that Sam's been looking at the monitors. I think is there anything we've got to report with?
Had some feedback on technical issues. I think one or two people having technical issues. We've got 2 questions as well through there. So thanks for those. Keep me coming.
Okay. Okay. In that case, then please do continue to fire up any questions, and we will take a look at that shortly. So from the workshop as well, so the areas that we've just been talking about are probably the ones that we've seen a lot of work already underway. There's a number of areas though that we sort of flagged up within the sessions that we'd also that we've seen as key areas. Either, and that's not just our own personal view, and certainly that's something that's been reflected from DfT and UKRLG liaison group, and also, to be fair, also from authorities. I think that the areas that we have been looking at aren't just something that's alien to practitioners. It's something that there's recognised benefits in. So again, just to sort of perhaps refresh our memory, how long is it since we last saw the recommendations? There's a lot of recommendations there. Having talked about perhaps grouping it into some of those themes, I know that another way of reviewing and reflecting on progress is actually, rather than looking at them as a individual recommendation by recommendation, actually to look at areas of service. And obviously there's a lot of recommendations multiple recommendations that may well feed into a single area of service. So it's a slightly different way of sort of cross-cutting a number of those recommendations. So if you can see on the screen, we've got the sort of 4 general areas: data requirements, what do we need and what have we got? Data usage, how do we make the best of that? Resilience. Again, like risk, a very broad-ranging topic, and performance, a little bit about how we are connecting the levels of performance and how we can use that to our benefit. I think certainly on the data element, for any of you who've heard Steve talking from a local authority perspective, I know that data is something that the department are increasingly seeing within England as a real critical area. I know that there is work. We would expect the self-assessment questionnaire to perhaps include some areas regarding that going forward. And likewise, resilience. Mentioned earlier about the new code being, the emphasis being on a move towards a risk-based approach. That was probably the most significant change, but it was also I suppose, as well as that review, the one area that probably was really, should we say, not necessarily introduced, but probably emphasised the most strongly was that resilience. Certainly, that's over the past few years growing importance, and we'll look into that one. So, looking at data requirements. I suppose the first step is around, okay, well, what assets have we got? What assets have we got there? How much do we need to keep track of those, and so on? I think one of the opportunities with regards to the risk-based approach and something that had come out from engaging with authorities was perhaps where there'd previously been some gaps, should we say, in inventory. I think there's sometimes been perhaps a little bit of a fear that if we start collecting that asset type, then all of a sudden we're going to have to go down the road of collecting all of it, even though it might not be cost effective to do that. It might be very difficult to do so, etc. So I think an example there, and this may not be for all authorities, it may not be the case, but for instance with vehicle restraint systems, I think what it's with a risk-based approach, it allows you to sort of actually say, well, these are the highest risk areas or highest parts of the key parts of the hierarchy. We're going to actually start building up our asset inventory over time. It's not going to be all within 1 year, maybe over a number of many years maybe, but certainly using that to should we say pace some of that inventory collection and really actually get proper value for money from it. Again, a little bit like with hierarchy, inventories do ebb and flow to a degree. So actually keeping on top of that and maintaining that. And perhaps the last point on there regarding innovation in condition data collection. I know that there's been a lot. Well, there is a lot of work ongoing with this, and I'm sure that there's more on the horizon. Certainly, I'm aware of a number of authorities and suppliers that are working together to trial all sorts of new technology, be it different ways of capturing, different types of sort of cameras, or using sort of smartphones and the like, mobile phone data to a degree, artificial intelligence even. So there's real sort of opportunities there. I think some of that is possibly an early adoption stage, but with the pace of change of technology and certainly the potential benefits from that, would expect some of those to really be coming onto the horizon for, should we say, the wider sector imminently. So actually, once we've got that data, I suppose the next thing is, okay, well, we need to use that smartly. We're not just collecting data for data's sake. That data is an asset, but data is the new oil, etc. So really being able to use that to plan investment, life cycle planning. It's not, should we say, a new concept for many of us. There's been tools out, certainly the HMET tools and a lot of structures toolkit and the like have been out there. And there's been sort of specific bespoke systems as well that offer that as well. I thought it's been using that for a number of years, but certainly being able to use it smarter and faster is going to be key. So really being able to identify how much we need and where we can spend it best. On the comms piece, I think the part of that first point there about making the case, really being able to use data to justify and back up those the arguments and the case that you are making, be that to defend or make the case to retain funding as it is, or certainly to even make a push within authorities for additional funding, and outside of local authorities there are a number of different funding routes that are available for authorities, and actually having that data to really sort of build up a robust business case for that is absolutely vital to actually getting your hands on keenly fought funds there. And also around actually using data as well as it from an asset, a financial element, increasingly like the customer element and that public perception is key, and actually being able to use that data to really articulate what what is our current performance, where how have we improved the network, how are we working around it. There's a big piece there around how we can actually can people still hear us? Yeah. No problem. If there are any issues, remember that the troubleshooter guide, I believe, is towards the bottom of the screen. But yeah, sorry, where was it? So again, using that data to articulate to potentially to the members of the public, but also to potentially senior decision makers, members within the authority, if there is, shall we say, if they're able to understand and potentially have it visualised, the implications of funding decisions, it can go a long way to convincing people of arguments. So moving on to resilience, I think the key thing that Steve, and again quote Steve because he's obviously very closely affiliated with the workshops. I think that he was really at pains to point out that it's more than gritting. It is a wider issue than that. And a lot of authorities have made great progress with gritting. So we shouldn't be doing that down, but equally we shouldn't be getting just focused on that. And once we've got our winter maintenance plans in place, and thinking that's that's us done for the next 12 months or however long. So there's a number of areas there. I know within the code we did cover a broad range of potential resilience issues. I know that security was one that sadly has come to the fore over the course of the past couple of years since the code had been published, and really that security-minded approach to managing our network is something that we do all need to acknowledge. Really tying it into that work behind the hierarchy, the usage, populations, who's actually using it, and where those key points, certainly those key services really need to be connected and accessible for folk. And also, perhaps not just the actual services, but the, if there are areas with, it may well be down to some local knowledge and the like, and which may come down to some of the, that embedded knowledge within the inspectors and the like, or wardens and vulnerable people. If there's different needs of those communities, and that's something that needs to be built in. And that final point there regarding routes with limited diversions, that was something that was specifically raised as an area that authorities really do need to be aware of. And I understand that there is going to be increasing focus on how that is going to work. Yeah. And then there was also a point on there regarding collaboration with neighbours. Again, going back to that, that starting point there. It's no good having, the most resilient network in the world if that resilience ends at the boundary of your authority. It will impact not just on your neighbour but also on yourself. So really being able to understand how that sort of cross-boundary issues work is going to be key. So I think, finally, you may be glad to know, we look at performance management, and I think there was some, I think the theme here really was regarding, I think there's been a lot of, there can be, well, certainly some authorities, perhaps a focus on managing performance when it comes to delivery of contracts and the like. I think that there's been some moves to really move, build on that, and also perhaps look at that a little bit more regarding service and so on within the authority. So moving away from, well, building on top of that sort of contractual performance. And I think one of the key benefits of this is linking those, being able to use it to link from your organisation, the local authorities' sort of vision for your borough, your council, whatever it is, and actually being able to drill that down through into those highway requirements, highway objectives, and then drilling that down into those levels of service and performance measures, etc. And by having that sort of, I suppose, that golden thread, it does actually, again, going back to the previous one regarding making the case, actually having that golden thread, again, we have seen it as something that is, it does actually engage with senior decision makers if they can understand how it actually, perhaps what might be a bit of an operational decision can affect, their strategic objectives. It does help make the case there. It also helps if you've got that there, if it does look as though, should we say, if levels of service have been set to, should we say, to an unachievable level, it gives you, I suppose, as a practitioner, the opportunity to flag that up. And essentially, if there is still, should we say, a senior decision made to go ahead with that level, then actually, I suppose, that ownership of the risk regarding those levels of service, it can, should we say, help protect the practitioner if they're actually saying, no, we need to look at that again and perhaps being overruled. So conscious that that's, for me, going rapid fire for quite some time now. I know that we are well within the hour slot. I think Sam was picked up on a few questions coming through the Oracle.
Yes. Should we crack on with those?
Yeah,
we've got 3 questions so far. Let me pull them up onto the screen for our presenters in the room. All 3 questions are from the same person, so thanks for that. But yeah, don't be shy, everybody. They're a lovely bunch here, so do keep your questions coming. First question, so what are your thoughts on using condition surveys for evidence-based works programs rather than for single data list? Does DfT have a position? Some authorities are dropping scanner in favour of engineer and treatment surveys.
I'd say, not wanting to put words in Steve's mouth, but I think it's fair to say DfT are really looking to, they don't want to be locked down necessarily into specific ways of doing things. That was, I guess, part of the whole ethos behind the moving to the code and the risk-based approach. Again, so actually being able to use an approach that really works for you, and certainly being able to really get maximise the benefits from innovation. I think that really does mean that as an authority you have got perhaps should we say greater flexibility to try different ways going forward. Hopefully that's covered that one.
Fantastic, thank you, John. You mentioned risk-based approach. Before we crack on, LOS, is that level of service?
Level of service,
okay. Yeah. Risk-based approach, there may not be historic evidence to assess what risk there would be for a lower level of service. It would be difficult to reduce a level of service to test it without potentially introducing risk. Has this made authorities reluctant to change how they do things?
Possibly. I think there's, by their nature, I think, there is, people have recognised that there is risk with making these changes. I think, with risk, if the risk is managed appropriately, that's where there's benefits. I think there's possibly been a bit of a, should we say, a number of authorities, probably quite a few authorities might be, should we say, managing risk quite conservatively, should we say, to start with. No, that I think there's a lot of authorities that sort of personally engage with. I think there has been, even if it has been conservative, I think there's actually been, some movement and some testing of that risk. I think there's perhaps other authorities that might have perhaps gone a little bit more, I'm not going to say spectacular with how they're managing risk, but I think some of that will, over time, how those authorities are dealing with that and how those, the levels of service are actually, turn out in reality. I think that's going to be something that, we're all going to be watching and seeing. I know there was something actually from one of the sessions. There was talk about, okay, well, now this is the point of 2 years post publication. I think there was some sort of interest in having almost that 1 year from now, having a look back to and sharing some of those lessons across the sector, across authorities, to really see how authorities have done things differently over the upcoming 12 months and certainly how that's impacted on them and their service.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got one more question's come in, so we've got 2 left to go, so do keep them coming, please. Will adherence to the code become more of an influence in incentive funding?
I understand that there is work that is to be, about to commence, if not already, on reviewing the incentive funding. I know that there's perhaps been some public statements of areas that may well be introduced in that. Data, I think it's fair to say, it will probably be the bookie's favourite on that one, if you were a betting person. But also I know that another area was regarding around environmental, and I know that there is actually quite a number of environmental recommendations within the code. I think the code itself probably actually permeates through a lot of those questions already on the self-assessment questionnaire. So I don't know. It may not be put across as a specific question. It may be something that's embedded in a number of the existing questions or the new ones. But I don't know. Can't take my word for how the incentive funding is going to be developed. But that's just my view.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question we had was around resilience of routes. Now, resilience of routes with limited diversion is a fair point, but needs to be qualified. We all have those routes that have no diversion, but only support a single operational premise.
Okay, fair point. That I think in those instances, I think it's really what really needs to be done. Then is okay if we do know that there is should we say, critical points or frailties to our resilient network or rather our wider network. I think it's really understanding, okay, if that does, if the worst happens and that route is cut off or otherwise impaired, are there contingency plans in place, work around communications, other ways, perhaps a little bit of, I think some of that might go onto there might be a bit of an onus there on, for instance, if it's a business premises, perhaps a little bit of engagement, and there may well be parts of the authority that can support that. I think the key thing is if there is, should we say, isolated elements that are perhaps, should we say, prone parts of the network to potential disruption or cut off. It's not, having that resilient network doesn't mean that you've got to start throwing money at it willy-nilly just to, to make sure that service is 100% reliable.
Thank you. The last question we've got, so please do keep questions coming, everyone. Last question, I would like advice on what form of training should be designed and delivered for decision makers developing, authorising and implementing the RBA, please. For example, Well Managed Highways Infrastructure COP A532. Those involved in managing, developing and implementing the risk-based approach must be competent to the satisfaction of the Highway Authority. Authorities should provide clear guidance and training to employees and establish requirements for others managing or carrying out activities. The guidance and training should include establishment of the risk-based approach itself and practical implementation.
Well, as I had alluded to earlier, I know that the UKRLG liaison group are very much looking at this as right now. I know that there's there's been work undertaken by some authorities already to perhaps build up that sort of framework for how we gauge competence and evidence that across those roles. The points that you've made there about the management, development and implementation, all these are all roles that need to be covered. Clear guidance and training, again, that sort of internal comms piece. That is something that there will be, like I say, support forthcoming from a UKRLG liaison group perspective.
Okay,
so I would say one to watch. Of course, there'll be communications about that as and when that's appropriate. But as always, the UKRLG liaison group website is always a good place to keep an eye on for any announcements regarding this.
Excellent, thank you. We've had one more question slip in there, so thank you. How can we apply the risk-based approach in our job on a day-to-day basis when dealing with highway claims for authorities?
I'll probably, my answer to that will probably be, I would expect it's something that's already part of that day-to-day role. Apologies, I'm misinterpreting the question. I think it's again, perhaps going back to something that sort of touched on earlier regarding, that some of this mutual risk-based approach. It's been seen as a big change by some, by some parties. But I think also, there's, people have been doing excellent work for a number of years in challenging situations. I think it's, there's an element of that where it's actually probably been done, without even, I was about to say without even thinking, but it's part of our, ingrained in how we go about even our own personal lives to a degree. But I think perhaps going back to that question again, I think it might be a case that if it's perhaps a little bit more formalised now, perhaps it gives a little bit more confidence to people in when they're actually dealing with those claims. If there's that, that laid out process, if it's been evidenced, if there's competence throughout the, should we say, the decision chain and the action chain, I think that hopefully minimises that or mitigates that risk and provides us with a bit more confidence.
Excellent, thank you. No, we haven't had, one has just popped in as I speak. So mentioned at the London meeting was the sharing of experiences in defending claims under a risk-based regime. Has there been any progress in providing a way of sharing experience?
Well, I suppose in a word, no. So apologies for that. We can certainly look at that and see if there is some sort of facility to assist with that. I think we just possibly need to be mindful of, obviously we want to be keen to be sharing that, but at the same time not trying to obviously sort of create de facto standards, but I don't think that's, to be honest, too much of an issue with that there. I know that one of the things that probably did come up there was through the sessions, I know that a number of people who have been engaged in this have been taking part in a number of series of should we say, sort of show trials, sort of mock court cases that have been put together by some of our colleagues in the legal industry. And I understand from feedback that I picked up from some of those practitioners who'd attended that those really did provide some sharp insight into what might be there, and some of the thoughts about how to actually prepare for and address some of those issues. But I think what you said there is very much actually, okay, how's it going to pan out in real life? How's it going to turn out in the courts? And I think, yeah, absolutely valid point there about perhaps, should we say, facilitating that knowledge sharing.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And then the last question we have in at the moment, so still time to have any more. I appreciate the local authority need to review the skills and competences of their inspectors, but do legal and insurance teams need to do the same to support a risk-based approach?
Very good question. Very good question. That I would say yes, would be my personal view. I think in some authorities, those legal and insurance teams, again, every authority differs. I'm well aware that some authorities that already is, you say, some pretty close working with regards to that. Other authorities perhaps have a slightly more, should we say, distant or separate relationship with those parts of their authorities. I think it's while we have really looked, we did look to those risk legal insurance sectors to provide some assurance during the preparation of the code. That really did again provide some assurance of what we're doing and steering what is required. I think it's a case of everyone is always looking to continually improve. So by all means, I would suggest that bringing them into that sort of training and development, or even just sort of that communication and engagement, I think that can only be beneficial. And I think there may well be, as part of this sort of competence framework, I think there might be some element to touch onto that, but again, perhaps speaking a little bit early in the process for that one, so we can wait and see.
Hey, lovely, thank you. We've answered all the 8 questions that we've had in on the feed. Hopefully you've realised that you can't see each other's questions. So if any more do come in, we'll hit those. Just while we wait for any final questions, just a quick reminder that you can't see each other's input. So we've only got a very small sample of who's turned up. I think 3 people have identified themselves out of 130 plus. So it's a very small sample. We'd love to know who's out there. So please don't be shy putting in your putting your name and organisation. It really won't be spread beyond the presentation.
That would be, like I say, that would be really beneficial if you are able, like I say, we'll be handling it in the strictest of confidence. But I think that will really, it'll help us know where that message has gone to. If there are, if we are able to identify perhaps some gaps in where we've been hitting the sector, if some of our colleagues have not been able to make it today, it'll help us to, perhaps sharpen future communications and the like. So, yeah, please do share your identity with us, and we shall handle it discreetly.
Okay, thanks very much. We've even had a thoroughly enjoyed the presentation today comment, but no idea who sent it. So thank you, whoever you are. No other questions have come in. So are you happy to wrap up there, John?
Yep. So I think what you've got, I think you should be able to just see on the screen there my email address. So if there are any further comments or queries, then you do fire one across there now. We've also got the, I think some of you may have also picked up on the UKRLG, or is it the codes of practice at atkinsglobal.com as well. So if you want to copy that one in as well, then if I'm otherwise engaged, then you will be able to get it will be picked up by someone. And there's also the website address for the UKRLG page. Like I say, any further updates and the like with the code or any other supporting information will certainly be published on there.
Fantastic, thanks very much. We've got some names and organisations coming through, so a few more of those, thank you. And just in terms of making the recording available, is that going to be available on the website there?
On the UKRLG website, yeah. So there may be a little bit of a delay. I understand as well. It'll be on there as soon as possible.
Okay, and yes, can you send us a link to replay this, please? That will be please monitor the UKRLG website. Otherwise, if we're happy to finish up, then please just close down the browser when you're ready. We're all done, so you're free to go. And
Are we okay to leave that open a little bit?
yes,
If anyone else
we
wants
can
to
open
add
the
their
same.
names?
Yeah, please do keep adding your names and organisations before you leave. We'd love to see those. No one else will see them. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and close down the browser when you're ready.
Thank you.